Good afternoon, everybody. Daniel Sherman here. I'm driving back from the jail. Sun's up now, so I wanted to talk about Kentucky's shared custody, shared visitation law. So when I first started practicing, there was essentially a presumption that the parties should share joint custody, but there was no presumption as to who should have the child or children primarily, and 90% plus cases, the courts basically named somebody the primary custodian, and then the other person would be the non-residential parent, and they would receive visitation. Typically there's going to be weekends and all that other stuff, holidays. I think I calculated it one time. It was like 113 days. Some of those were only for a few hours. But that's what used to happen up until Kentucky enacted the presumptive shared visitation. And I just want to be clear on a couple things because there's some confusion. There's a difference between visitation and custody. And I tell this to clients all the time. I have people that have custodial rights but have no visitation, or very little. And I have some people that have no custodial rights but have a lot of visitation. So, you could conceivably have shared visitation but not custody. Custody just involves decision making. It doesn't involve how often you see the child. So really the shared custody is really a shared visitation presumption. And that's what it is. It's just a presumption. The presumption can be rebutted. I will say it can be difficult to do that. After that law was enacted, there was quite a few Court of Appeals cases that came down and said, listen, it says 50-50. You have to do exactly 50-50. You can't do 3 days for one and 4 days for the other, even though that's, pretty close to 50-50. The Court of Appeals is very clear. They also were a little hard on judges that, overrode the presumption. You really had to prove that if you didn't want the presumption to apply, you bear that burden. So it was, that's why, in almost all custody cases where the parties live relatively close, if you have people that live out of state, you just can't do shared visitation because the child's going to have to go to school. You can't have somebody, driving from, Kansas, 2 days a week to drop the kid off at school, pick the kid up. It's just, it's not feasible. So that's a really good example, when the presumption really should be rebutted, because really only one person's going to be able to do that. But provided the parties usually live within a reasonable distance of one another, a county, maybe 2 counties over, the shared visitation presumption applies. And so I want to talk about kind of why that was done and maybe some of the effects. So Kentucky based its shared visitation law on a Pew Research Institute study. And if you don't know who the Pew Research Institute is, it's a nonprofit group. They do all kinds of studies. They publish them. They're cited a lot by government agencies. They're cited a lot by private agencies. They do a really good service. And one of the things the Pew Research Institute studied was how do children fare when they're in single mother households or they're single father households, and how does the amount of visitation the other parent has, how does that affect the children. So the first thing they did is they did a control group. The control group would be people that were married and were together, at least till the children were grown. So that was the baseline. So they basically said, okay, out of this many marriages, say 1,000 marriages, this many kids are sexually abused, and out of this many marriages, this amount of kids are physically abused, and out of this many marriages, this is how many kids go graduate high school, and out of this many marriages, this is how many kids graduate college. And they did all that, they did it for income, they did it for abuse, they did it for everything. And they did the exact same thing for single parent households, and then they also did it for shared parenting households as well, and looked to see what the numbers were. And the numbers were actually quite startling. If you were a single mother and the father just had either no or just guideline visitation every other weekend, you were like 24 times more likely to be sexually abused. If you were kind of same hypothetical, single mom household, you were like 8 times more likely to be physically abused. Now, when you reversed it to where they had the father household, you were about 8 times more likely to be sexually abused. And the physical abuse was about 5. It was pretty similar, but and there are various obvious reasons for that. The most dangerous person in a child's life is either the father or really the stepfather. That is the person who does most of the abuse, and that is the person who does most of the sexual abuse. Typically, you don't get that from stepmom. So that's just kind of the nature. It's really human nature. So that kind of is why that makes sense. So when they compared that and they looked at the say the education statistics, you were much less likely to graduate high school. Your income numbers were lower. I mean, it was substantial. I think the difference was like $1 million over the child's lifetime. It was very similar to if you don't graduate high school. Like the difference in the amount of money the person will make, whether or not that person, if it was a female, would have an out-of-wedlock child, whether that person was going to go to jail, were they going to commit a crime. And the numbers were, for single parent households were pretty high, especially when compared to married households. And then when they looked at the shared parenting was relatively close to if they stay married. And, the reason for that, I think for me is kind of obvious. Number one, you get where dad's involved, mom's involved. If something's going on at the other house, one of the other parents are going to know about it and they're going to say something. Whereas if you're only seeing somebody every other weekend, the communication isn't there. Also, not only do you have that, but I think having a second parent around really is a deterrent to new boyfriend, new girlfriend, new mom, new dad of doing anything, because there's a good chance that the other parent's going to find out about it and they're not going to be too happy. So I think that that added a deterrent. So that was some of the reasons, and the other reasons is just having both parents involved just it's a better environment for a child. They get things from dad that they wouldn't get from mom, and they get things from mom that they wouldn't get from dad, and that's why the married is the optimal thing. Or you're not even married. I mean, as long as you're together. I mean, like I say the word married, but really what I mean is couples that stay together throughout the children until they reach adulthood. And I've got plenty of clients that with somebody for 50 years and just never get married. They embrace kids. It doesn't happen terribly too often, but it does happen. So that when I say married, I really those individuals apply to. So based on those numbers, they basically said, look, we need to do something about this, and we need to do shared visitation. Now, as far as an attorney is concerned, for me, it does make cases a lot easier. We're not litigating like in almost every divorce case, we were litigating custody, and that's kind of what you did. That's all you did was fight for custody. Now it's a presumption. You get to go to your client and say, listen, this is what the judge is more than likely going to do. Are you going to waste your money on it? I mean, why, we're pretty confident this is what's going to happen. And then, those cases where the presumption isn't going to apply. They're pretty obvious anyway. Like I said, with the dad or mom's in jail is a pretty good reason, or living a couple states over is another good reason. So it does make practicing law a lot easier when it comes to domestic law. Now, I've heard some detractors of shared custody and shared visitation. And one of the detractors say you get spouses that don't want to leave the relationship, because then they're going to have to share their child half the time with the abuser. If you're in a physically abusive relationship, at least you're there. If you're together, like, you get to see it. But if you're not there, you're sharing visitation with potentially a dangerous person. So that's one of the drawbacks. Now, I will say, I don't think the numbers bear that out. That's why I kind of gave you those statistics. Certainly the abuse is a little bit higher than married couples, but it's not. It's nowhere near the single parents. So for me, I don't find that. That's more of a personal argument. That's not. You're not worried about the kids. You're just saying, I just don't want to share a kid with somebody because this guy beat the hell out of me and he's a prick. Well, I mean, that's fine, but that doesn't mean he's a prick to your kid. So, and I say he because usually physical abuse is promulgated by the male. I mean, that's just what the numbers show. But certainly it could be with the female, or even if you get same-sex couples, kind of the same thing. So, what I personally think about it, I think it's good. I think it makes things easier. I think it'll create more well-rounded individuals. Now we won't know, because this experiment was started, I think, in 2017. We started it, so when these kids get older, we'll be able to find out, are those numbers similar to what the Pew Research Institute found? So time will tell. I don't know what you guys think about it. Some of you probably think it's great. Some of you think it's maybe not great. I will say that, and some lawyers, online will kind of say this, that, when you had a marriage that was dissolving and you had a single parent household, there was really almost a financial incentive to get a divorce, because one party was going to have to pay, child support, and the child support charts were just absolutely ridiculous how they used to be. And right now with shared visitation, I mean, there's really, I had one case where mom makes $30-something thousand and dad makes $55,000, and dad's paying like $95 a month because of the shared visitation credit. So I think it's a little bit more fair on the child support, and it there's not like I said, I'm an economics guy. Incentives I think are very real, and so when you do have some of these incentives to say, well, I can leave this person, I can get paid to do it, I can get with somebody else, and now I got two people supporting this kid. So it removes that as well. It removes most of that. So I think it's a good thing. Hopefully you guys do too. If not, just let me know, comment down below, and I'll be happy to respond to it, and maybe do a video based on some of these comments. So I did want to do that shared visitation video for you and kind of explain to you what it means, and what it does, and why I think it's a good thing. So y'all take care.